We are back with Roy Macintyre, and we're here to talk about the Tornado F3 versus the F-15. So, Roy, can you share your experiences of going up against the Eagle?
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me back on to Aircrew Interview. Talking about another one of those situations of the Tornado F3 against, and this time I'm going to talk about the what was peacetime-wise the biggest challenge for us, the biggest test, and that was the F-15 Charlie. There were F-15 Echoes out of Lakenheath, but in the time that I was flying, they were principally more concerned with their multi-role aspect and not specifically air-to-air. We did most of our affiliation when it came to F-15s against the Grim Reapers out of Lakenheath, who are no longer on the base, of course. But they were, without doubt, the biggest challenge. The F-15C, and it always was going to be as I say, the toughest challenge, the biggest not threat, but the biggest opponent as far as capability was for us. Why did we do it? We were never going to, well, hopefully never going to go against them operationally, but it allowed us to test ourselves. But the F-15C, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers know, even back in the early 2000s and the late 90s, was a very capable machine in all regimes of the air-to-air war. So that's why it was a tremendous challenge for us to go up against it. With not, it's particularly to begin with, not a great expectation of being successful. Why was it so good? Well, the airframe is extremely well built. It's got a huge wing area, about the size of a tennis court. So in all regimes, in terms of mostly in speed and certainly in height blocks, it's got a great turn performance. The radar was always very good, and it's always carried a very potent suite of air-to-air missiles. And when we first started going against it, it was the AIM-7 Mike Sparrow, semi-active, same as what we had, but it had longer legs. So go back to the old story of his sword is longer than my sword, which gives you a problem to reach me before my sword point can reach him. So there's the first problem. Radar and the performance of the aircraft. There was one weak point, and I will still maintain it was a weak point, although I'm sure some F-15 aficionados would argue against it, but it was the weak point, and that was the fact there was just one person in the aircraft. That meant that either he had to load, and I say he, of course it's now can be she, but I'll just stick with he at the moment, had to load shed some information in terms of capacity, taking it all in, or latterly, and as we see on the more modern aircraft, the system has to manage the input of information to the pilot. And to that extent, there is some fusion and management and shall we say, hiding of certain bits of information that perhaps a two-man crew, such as the F3, could handle. And that's really where we went. We knew the weak point of the F-15C was the fact there was one person in it, and we had two brains against his one brain. Anyway, to start off with, how did it go about its fight? It went high and fast, and by high, we're in block 4 usually, so 40,000 feet plus. Why? Because it could do it. The airframe and the engines could put it up there. But why do they want to be that high? Because they're imparting a lot of energy to the missile when they launch. A lot of kinetic and potential energy. What does that mean? It means that they could launch at a much longer range, absolute max range of the missile, because it has that energy. Or if they were taking the engagement in further and launching it closer, it meant the missile would have a bit more, or could have quite a bit more energy in the end game when there's the last minute maneuvering, etc. The missile could cope with it. Obviously, absolute max range, there is virtually no capacity for the missile at the end to do anything other than go in a straight line towards the target. And if the target then disappears off stage left, there's very little the missile can do. So there's a low probability of kill. But it does mean there are missiles in the air coming against you much earlier than somebody who is launching from a lower speed and or a lower height. let's read the F3 to that. The other thing that comes in, and a little bit esoteric, but it did have an effect. We in the F3 force were always trying to stay hidden. I stay hidden radar-wise, stay hidden visually. And at range, one of the worst do was get into the contrail heights, and that the block where you're putting out the contrails, i.e. you're leaving a big white line in the sky behind you saying, look, here I am. And you could spot them from, 20, 30, 40 miles away, you could be spotted. And that, for us, gave away quite a bit of tactical advantage. F-15 attitude was completely different. They didn't care. They were the big boys on the block. And in fact, they took great delight in coming in at block 4 and leaving contrails behind, or high block 3, depending on what the weather was on the day. The formation wall, so line abreast. So if you have a 4-ship, it's effectively three and a bit miles wide. And they'd come in on high block 3, low block 4. And there was something quite intimidating when you suddenly look at 40 miles and see 4 white lines coming towards you, line abreast. They don't care. They don't care that we can see you. They are coming, and what are you going to do about it? So there was quite an intimidating factor there. And so we would never do that because we didn't have, at that time, and you could argue even at the end of its career, the F3 never had that machismo that it could step into the boxing ring and say, here I am, I don't care, you can see me, I'm coming for you. We were always still a little bit of subterfuge, a little bit of tactics, and a little bit of guile to try and get the advantage. Not the Americans, not the F-15s. They were coming. They didn't care they could see that we could see them. They're coming down the street. What are we going to do about it? So anyway, so that was the initial start. You could expect them to get contact round about the same time as us, maybe a little bit earlier, but we could certainly expect to feel pressure. Now, whether they actually trigger pressed or not on a low PK, probability of kill, for the reasons I've just said, the missile at its maximum range won't be able to do anything at the end. So I knew we were being targeted. And I should go back to early days when they had the Sparrow. It was semi-active like our Skyflash. So that meant our RHWR told us when the radars were looking at us, when they were going into single target track, i.e. locking. And also because it was semi-active, we would get what we call continuous wave form from the radar, which is the missile guidance, and our RHWR would see it. So we would definitely know we are being targeted, and we could probably work out by which F-15, not necessarily, but we should have a good chance of doing that. So we would be under pressure from the start. We couldn't expect to be able to go in on the first phase and trigger them to react, because we were semi-active as well. So therefore, we were forced to close towards the fight just as they were. But bearing in mind their sword is longer, it means that their sword point is going to go into my chest before my sword point reaches his chest. So in the first phase, if we bluffed it out and there was no technical failures, radars losing lock, etc., and of course we could put chaff and stuff like that out, we would expect to lose. That was not a winning hand on this particular round of poker. So that immediately put us on either the defensive or in a mindset that we need to change the game if we're going to succeed and not just go straight in of this first fight. I should also say there's one other factor which was never always true, but it's one we just kept in the back of our minds, because if we could identify this, it could give us a little bit of an advantage. And that was a typical F-15 4-ship. In terms of pilot experience, you would have numbers 1 and probably number 3 as the most experienced pilots, leading a 4. 2 and certainly number 4 tended to be the junior pilots. on routine training missions. By no means was that guaranteed, but it was something we kept in the back of our minds. And if we could see which aircraft was perhaps not performing as effectively as the others, we would think, I mean, that's the junior pilot in number 4, and he would be the first one we would try and go to. Not necessarily a driving force, but it was a factor if we could spot it. Didn't happen all the time, wasn't obvious all the time, but it's just another one of those little things. And I'm afraid that's the game we were in. We were looking for any advantage we could get. So what could we do to defeat or change this first phase? And the answer to that is to, well, one, stay alive, so not walk onto those first rockets if they indeed were launched, and 2, disrupt, degrade the 4 Eagle pilots' SA, situational awareness. And by that, I mean using the radar picture. So it starts to get a little bit showgroundish, a little bit in terms of the tactics, and perhaps not what we would expect to do in operations. But bear in mind, we're not training against an F-15 for operations. We're training against F-15s to exercise us and give us a really strong challenge to sharpen our basic skills. So the tactics we followed, we were not even thinking we would be carrying forward into an operational scenario. So I'll not pretend otherwise. What's the sort of thing we could do? Well, some sort of decoy disruption. And what sort of things could we do? We could come in close formation in terms of numbers, and I'd go back to Top Gun. You know, Goose can see 1. Oh, I can see 2. There's three bandits out there now as they break out of what we call resolution cell. So you can have 2 aircraft so close together that the radar can only see 1 return. So we're hiding numbers. And then you split at an appropriate range to then make 2 targets. Or perhaps the radar only sees 1 target, and now we have somebody who is unsighted radar-wise and therefore can cause a lot of problems. It's a chance. It doesn't always work, but it's something like that. The more dynamic one, when we're coming in as a 4, and our 4 formation was never wall. We never favoured wall in the earlier days. Perhaps towards the end when we had different weapons, I'll come on to that in a bit. Come in 2 pairs in fighting wing in battle, so split by about a mile and a half, a pair, and then another pair, and we would coordinate. And whether that would be a pair dragging back, we'd call it a pump, where they would reset back, or more spectacularly, we would have like a spider explosion, where all 4 of us would, at a certain range, and I'm not going to go into numbers, at a certain range, we would go in all 4 directions vertically and in azimuth. So suddenly we would give them a very confusing picture. The important thing that would happen there we would have to try and assess, and you probably only get about 20 seconds having executed. You would only get about 20 seconds to assess whether you were still being targeted, still being seen. If you felt that you could now step forward because you were now unseen by any of the 4 Eagles, you could then step into the danger zone, which was, for those of you that have seen my discussions before about the phases of BVR combat, we're moving into phase 2, the radar to visual. We would only step into that if we felt we were unsighted. If we knew that an eagle was looking at us and we carry on further, we're just waiting on that sword point going into your chest. Game over. If it didn't work, we would have to all pump and back and reset, and hopefully get enough distance for us to get our proverbial in 1 sock, face up again coordinated, and try again, waiting to see what the Eagles have done. Now, if they felt superior, and they often did, and felt and still had situational awareness on us, all they would do is keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually we either face up and die, or we would just run off the field and say, well, fair enough, you won that one. And we would set up and do the exercise again. It was always very dynamic, and I come back to the fact that we have two people on board to assimilate the situation. What's the radar telling us? What they are telling us? And also the pilot can concentrate on performing getting the airframe to perform to the best of its ability at any particular stage. So we could then come back with the best situational awareness, even if that was, you know what, we're not winning this, step away, otherwise we're going to die. In the early days, as I say, the 90s, etc., when we were semi-active against semi-active, it was very hard work. And we generally expected to take some hits, perhaps escape, and maybe get one kill. I mean, if I said in a typical sortie, 3 F-15 kills to 1 would be a
Right.
reasonable result for us. I mean, it was never brilliant, but it was a very tough machine, and we had a definitely an inferior system across the board compared to it. Now, I'm not saying that we ever did get a superior system. We never did, because the F-15 continued to develop, and it was always and still is a very capable machine. If we move into the 2000s, the arrival of data link for us, the F-15s had data link as well, particularly if that was tied into an E3. And then, of course, AMRAAM, the AIM-120, we were now equal swords with the F-15. And that's when it really started talking about in terms of destroying their SA became easier. It was still difficult, don't get me wrong. We still had to work hard, but the coordination that we could maintain between our elements or even individual aircraft through data link and the situational awareness we could hold on to, particularly if an E3 picture was being fed to us, was tremendous. So we could go through several iterations of trying to muddy the waters up as far as the F-15 was concerned, and we could generally see when it started to break down, i.e. there was a lone F-15 that was swanning around a little bit clueless. That's number 4. Let's get after them. Or there's a reset on their part because they knew that their situational awareness had degraded and they were now resetting, and gave us a chance to maybe step forward with a little bit of initiative, because while they're resetting and have their tails to us, particularly with AMRAAM, we've now got a chance to maybe get shots and pressure on them. Didn't always happen, and as I say, we always had to work, and we were still doing the dynamic changes of elevation and azimuth to try and lose ourselves as far as the F-15 radar was concerned, which was hard work, it must be said, because it still was a very good radar, and of course developed as the years went by, just as our radar did. So it was significantly easier, but it was always hard work. Generally speaking, if we got close and into the visual range, i.e. round 3 of the fight, and we haven't been targeted at that stage, it had to be quick on our part in terms of getting rockets away. Because in any turning fight, very quick, not that it could turn significantly tighter than us, unlike an F-16, say, but it could hold its energy much better. So therefore, in a prolonged turning fight, very quickly we bled energy. It had to be regained by giving away height. And when we got to base height, we could be pretty slow and vulnerable. Whereas the F-15 still had bags of energy and bags of performance. So a prolonged turning fight for us was never going to be good news and never going to have a great result. So if we actually got ourselves to the visual, it had to be quick trigger presses, kills, and out. The advantage is F-15s, very big in terms of fighters, quite easy to see. Yeah, not as bad smoky-wise as the F4s used to be, but still, when the power came on, you could get a bit of smoke trail. So depending on the background of the sky and cloud conditions, etc., they were usually quite easy to gain tally, hold the tally, and therefore easier to survive, because if you can see who you're fighting, you've got less chance of being shot. You're not in a state where you're never going to be touched, by no means, but certainly if you lose tally, you're going to lose the fight.
Mhm.
And the F-15, unlike the F-16, was a lot easier to retain the tally on in the visual fight. But as I say, much as it's great fun to do, you don't want to stay in a visual fight with. We
Yeah.
didn't want to stay in a visual fight with the F-15. It was more a case of out, and we could accelerate quite quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have on many occasions outrun an F-15 that's trying to chase me down. So in that respect, run away bravely. Yes, I can do
Yeah.
that as long as you make the decision early enough. So that's a bit of a cocktail glass mixture of how we went against the F-15. Great fun, but hard work, and for that reason, it was useful. It didn't give us operational tactics that we would use for real, but
Mhm.
it gave us a chance to exercise our skills across the board. And if we did get some kills against them, then it was, it was a bit like, non-league club just scoring against Barcelona. That was, whoa,
Yeah.
here we go. That sort of style.
If you knew you were going up against them, would you take the tanks off the Hindenburgs? Would you go clean?
If if the aircrew had a free choice, we would always go in clean.
Yeah.
Um, However, the squadron often had hours requirements. There was obviously other events coming up later on in the day or in the
Mm.
week that required tanks on, and the tanks don't just clip on and off. It was quite a job for the engineers. So, generally
Right.
speaking, to answer your question, we took whatever cards we were dealt. And obviously, if we had the tanks on, we could stay and get a few more face-offs against them, runs, but it did limit us G-wise and it did limit us speed-wise.
Mhm.
And again, if we lead across to what we would do for real in operations, we would blow the tanks off.
Yeah.
Can't do that in peacetime. Engineers wanted the tanks back.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we just had to go with whatever fit we were in and then modify things, which it could be a significant handicap. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was. It was.
And did you ever like debrief with the F-15 guys? You do have telephone calls or anything like that after like that fight?
Yeah, that was absolutely vital. Otherwise, there was a
Mm.
lot of learning going to be missed or
Mhm.
misconceptions of what went on. Oh, we thought we did this, blah blah blah, and there was some other factor that you're not aware of that actually changes the whole learning point completely. So it's important for both sides. At least in the early days, it was a telephone call, which was less than ideal. The
Mm.
best at all times was face to face. And there was a few times when lookers would have a detachment down to Lakenheath or vice versa, and we would have a
Ah.
whole week working with them. Particularly if we're down at Lakenheath, we'd work on, in those days, the North Sea ACMI. So we would have the pods on and we would get the benefit of the replays, etc., in the cabin that you also got when you go to exercises such as maple flag and red flag, etc. So that was the best. Latterly, and I know I've mentioned this before, we had a system called RAIDS, where it was a rangeless ACMI system where the pods just talked to each other,
Yeah.
recorded on a card, and we just could put the cards back into a ground terminal when we got home, and they could show us everything. As I mentioned before, the system could show weapon events and weapon timeouts, but for security, neither the RAF nor the United States Air Force allowed the system to have weapon events. We just wanted to keep that there, and we knew
Mhm.
ourselves when there were trigger presses and when weapon uh, missiles would time out, i.e., intercept the target. So we would make those self-assessments ourselves, purely from a security point of view. But
Mhm.
what it did give us was hopefully a complete picture of all the players, where they were, what height they were, what direction they were going at, and when they manoeuvred. So we could build up quite a comprehensive and accurate picture, and more importantly, draw the correct learning points from a particular engagement. So the debriefs were good. And then, of course, if we were on detachment down there after the mission was over, the debriefs usually carried on in that very important and highly secure room at the bar. And I know that the Reapers had the Reaper bar, which
Yeah.
was their own squad bar, which was very good. Yeah, so that was very important.
When you were like on detachment, would you be based there? Like, would it be F3s at Lakenheath, or would you just fly in, and or how would that work?
Normally, we try and go down there for a week or a fortnight or something like
Right.
that. So it kind of makes it a little bit more awkward if you haven't got ground crew there to help, because then the air
Yeah.
crew have to do the turnaround on the aircraft. There's only a limited amount of flying we can do when it's the air crew that are servicing the aircraft. So if it's a kind of one-off that just, you go down to the ACMI. In actual fact, ACMI, if we're using it, rather than going to Lakenheath, would probably go into Coningsby where there was F3
Yes.
support and we
Yeah.
get refueled there. But then you would lose the face-to-face debrief. So there was lots of factors that could govern what you actually did on the day, when did they need the aircraft back, etc. But the ideal situation was a week or a fortnight down there. So you could really get to know the guys, and we would also get to talk to them and understand more about their weapon system within national security
Yeah.
limitations, but in general, certainly the way they operate, because we would expect to operate with them, and we did operate with them in wartime conditions, in live ops. So face-to-face integration like that would always pay dividends.
So I have to ask, Roy, what was the banter between like you and the F-15C guys? Was it like professional, and then you could have banter, or how did that work?
Yep, yep, yeah, it was good. Different nationalities have different viewpoints, the different service disciplines, etc.
Yeah.
But F-15 pilots used to, when they come into a briefing, used to always leave a blank seat between each other. They would never sit four in four seats together.
Okay.
And in those days, why? Yeah, here it comes. If you sat together, it made them feel like they were gay.
No
Yep.
way.
No, that was it. They always left a blank seat, an empty seat between themselves
Wow.
because they didn't want to look like they were gay.
That's
Now,
mental.
yes, it was, and I don't know if that still goes on, but that was definitely the case in the 80s, 90s. Speak any more about it, but that was definitely the case. And the F-15 Charlies were the worst for that. Um,
Wow.
in the bar, though, great fun. Yeah, they would take banter and all the rest of it, etc. They were always very security conscious because they didn't want to give anything. And the Americans, in particular, are very tight about what they will give away. And
Mhm.
a certain aspect of a particular system that we would be quite happy to discuss, the equivalent, the Americans would say, no, US, no foreign, is their blanket.
Right.
And it was much tighter than we did, and I would say it was over tight. But then again, security is not a dirty word, and that's the way they wanted to play it. So in that respect, it was quite guarded in terms of what they talked about. But in terms of the banter, etc., yeah, and I do recall back down the Grim Reapers at Lakenheath, they had on a Friday evening at the end of flying something called a Reaper call in their Reaper bar, and they had these. I can't remember the title they had. The title they gave it, but it was basically the biggest mistake of the week. Somebody had to own up to the
Right.
biggest, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And they had this little stuffed gorilla, but they actually called it Spank the Monkey. And
Right.
whoever got the award for the biggest mistake of the week, biggest gaff, had to look after Spank the Monkey for the week. And when we're down there, we were in the Reaper call for that Friday, and the award of Spank the Monkey went to our United States Air Force exchange pilot. Would you believe?
Really?
Because he had made a mistake. I can't remember whether it was to do with fuel or recovery or something like that, but he owned up to it, and they decided, yep, he's getting Spank the Monkey. So for the following week, until we went home, he had to carry this monkey around after when there was fines if you lost it. It's a bit like the
Yeah.
lion in the British Lions tour sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So in that respect, no, it's good. And that's why detachments like that had benefits across the board and all sorts of things, etc., etc.
A couple of questions before we wrap up here, Roy. So, like, when you were talking to the guys, the F-15 guys, would they be? What kind of questions would they be asking you? Would be like, "Oh, what's the radar like? What's your weapons like? What's it like to fly?" What kind of questions would they be putting
Yeah,
to you?
across the board in terms of tactics. I mean, obviously during the sortie debrief, they would be asking, "Did you get detection here? Were you aware of us here? How did you know this was happening, etc., etc." And to a certain extent, we allowed them to see certain displays of our mission data tape,
Right.
and by that we could let them see the data link plan display. And now we wouldn't let them see the radar. They wouldn't let us see their radar, but
Right.
principally it was only one display for them, the radar, other things on it. And I have seen the display having flown in an F-15D, so I know what the radar display components were. We knew our weapons, but we wouldn't say how much we knew about their weapons. And they knew a little bit about our weapons, but they wouldn't say how much they knew about our weapons. So it was a little bit cagey in that respect.
Right.
And certainly with respect to the aircraft, yeah, it was a little bit guarded, and the conversations wouldn't be as free and easy. And that applies to all nations. By no means something that was just to the Americans. And you did have to be careful in the bar, just how once a couple of pints down, exactly to remember exactly what you can say and what you couldn't say.
But yeah, Roy. So, what you're currently up to? Are you still on the railways and doing that kind of
Yeah,
thing in your
still working
photography?
on the Mid Norfolk Railway signalling. We've kind of just started our busy winter period, which is the Polar Express train, which is based on the film, obviously, for those who have seen it,
Yeah.
Tom Hanks animated film. Very popular every year. And to be perfectly honest, is quite an important revenue stream for the railway. Um, so that involves fairly long days, mostly into the evening and night, because it is a light show. We have all sorts of stuff set up along the lines, the line and Santa's sleigh and what have you. So the best effect is at night, which is fortunate. Because it is getting dark around here about 3:45.
Yeah.
But anyway, that keeps me busy mostly at the weekends. I will see that right through to Christmas. Then there'll be a quiet period, mostly maintenance, and then we'll be kicking off the next year's season round about March, and off we go. But yeah, it keeps me busy and still enjoying it. I've also become a parish councillor in the village here,
Oh,
which
right.
is bringing on a few other things. I'm kind of pressured into volunteering for that. Yes, that's quite interesting, learning all about the ins and outs. And without boring everybody about it, there's a big political council shake-up coming to Suffolk and Norfolk. There's a reorganisation, and the preferred solution is not popular. So that's keeping me busy on that front as well. And yeah, rugby. Yeah, I've just been up to Edinburgh, mostly to
Yeah.
visit my daughter, of course. I did have a ticket for the Scotland Argentina match, and I'm now beginning to wonder whether that was worthwhile or not. At half time, it did seem like it was very worthwhile. By full time, no, not so good. No, it's good. We got up to see her reasonably often, and catch up with a few of the people I used to know up when I lived in Fife. So yeah, no, life's all right at the moment. Thanks.
Brilliant stuff. Well, it's great to hear you're keeping busy. But Roy, always a pleasure to chat to you. So thank you very much for coming back on the show.
No problem at all. Glad to talk and come back. I'll come back anytime.